I want to start the recording and introduce our amazing Pinebrook Family Answers team. We have Ann Compostela, Director of Family-Based Mental Health Services, Robin Carmody, Clinical Supervisor of School-Based Behavioral Health Services at Liberty High School in Bethlehem, and Leslie Tenbrook, Vice President of Clinical Services. So thank you, Ann, Robin, and Leslie, for sharing your time and your wisdom and your expertise with us, and take it from here.
All right, guys, thank you very much for joining us. We're excited to have you and excited to bring some of our different perspectives to some of the questions that you have. So what we're going to do is to reiterate what Beth said is that we're going to go through the information that you put on the Jamboard. And we're also going to throw in here and there some of the information that you guys got from, or that you guys added when you registered for this training. People also gave some suggestions. At any time, if you put something into the chat, we will stop and address that, because we would like to, keep this live and sort of, up to the moment. If you're uncomfortable with putting something in the chat, even though, again, it's not going to be recorded, feel free to send me a private message and I will make sure that the topic is addressed without identifying you in any way. So, what we're going to do is I'll pick up one of the topics, and then the three of us will sort of take turns commenting on that as well. And one that's come up not just today, but keeps coming up over and over again, we're going to start a little bit with anxiety. So it wasn't clear on the Jamboard if we're talking about the student's anxiety, the teacher's anxiety, the parent's anxiety, or everybody's anxiety. But I want to make it very clear what we taught before. I'll kick it to Ann and then Robin. When we're talking about anxiety, something that it's really important to remember, I might be being a little redundant, is that everything that we're feeling right now are normal feelings for an abnormal situation. That's a phrase we use a lot when we talk about trauma, and you've probably heard that in your trauma trainings as well. But the feelings that we have are normal, it's the situation that's not normal. And at this point, we're almost used to the pandemic, because we've been doing this for so long. But I'd like to point out that there's other things going on in the world as well. And without delving into politics at all, it's been a really difficult week. And a lot of people are really impacted by the stuff that's going on in the world politically as well. So everybody includes all of us and includes the kids. Secondary age kids obviously can kind of talk about this stuff more so than the younger kids, but even the older kids are picking up on the emotions of people around them. So if there's a lot going on in the home, whether that has to do with world events or just has to do with the family's survival, if the parents are anxious, the kids are going to be anxious. A lot of times we use the analogy of an anxiety ball, right? If somebody has a lot of anxiety, they're carrying around this big ball. Sometimes they want to throw it to you, and you catch that and you're like, okay, now I've sort of caught some of their anxiety. And this happens in families, this happens in classrooms, this happens in teams of workers. So anxiety can be really catching, and it's important that we talk about that. Let me kick it to Ann. Ann, do you want to talk a little bit about managing anxiety and what some of our youth are dealing with?
Absolutely. Anxiety is impacting everyone right now. I see it, I know, with my team members. They're talking about it with the families they're working with the children, with the adults. And I think it's so important to recognize that we're experiencing it as well, and that it's okay. It's, as Leslie said, very normal in this abnormal situation. I see it in a lot of the youth, in a lot of the different issues that are coming up. A lot of things that weren't coming up previously in family-based, more school issues that we hear about, because everyone is in this Zoom world, right? We're all in the Zoom world as teachers are feeling so burned out and children are feeling so burned out. And one of the things I know as far as tips, things that some of the teams are doing in working virtually with these secondary ed students and younger, is starting out with some expectations, light expectations of, okay, this is what's expected, but also this is what we're doing today, providing a little structure so that they can focus on what's coming up. We found that to be helpful in some cases. Robin?
Sure. I have found that a lot of between staff, students, everyone that I've worked with is in the same boat. So even if you kind of just self-reflect and are like, okay, so if my anxiety level is up to here, chances are my students are as well. And like Leslie was saying, it's a normal experience to what we are having right now. And even sharing that with students and letting them know that this is, you know, something that we're all feeling. Also, you know, your vulnerability in that, to let them know that, you know, this is very rough, but also let them know that it's going to end. This will end at some point. There will be a time when, you know, we will have COVID, but we're not going to be under these crazy Zoom meetings all the time and everything like that. So I think that's important as well, to show that there's light at the end of the tunnel.
I think that's a really good point. And someone else mentioned becomes more easily frustrated. And again, that could be all of us as well. I could refer to any of us.
Absolutely.
But I think that we're trying, kids are trying to accomplish tasks. And I have 2 teenage homeschool learners here, virtual learners here, and people getting very frustrated because they don't have, you know, people around them all learning the same thing. They feel kind of isolated. But I see the learners in my house getting really frustrated with some of the tasks. And I'm just trying to think of the best ways for teachers to manage this. One of the things that I wanted to talk about that has come up in previous sessions is the transitions, because that's where we're losing a lot of people in transitions between things. So we shared yesterday, we shared some tips on transitioning between things, but to connect it all together, we're talking about anxiety, we're talking about difficulty with frustration and transitions. Even with the older kids, I think it's important to take some time out during, you know, whatever learning block that you have, to first of all set the expectations at the beginning of this session. So, all right, guys, you know, we're all here for algebra class. What we're going to do is we're going to make sure everybody has your screen on. If you don't want to, you know, you can use a background if you prefer, but I need you to have your screen on so I know you're paying attention. With the little kids, we might say, all right, guys, what do we need to do? What are some of the rules? And they like to raise their hand and they like to say, oh, you have to do, you know, you have to pay attention. You can't talk. You can't play with your dog. We do that a little differently for older kids. Maybe just a reminder for them of what the expectations are for that session. And keeping in mind that different teachers in different classes have different expectations and different levels of tolerance for misbehavior. So if they came from one class with a real kind of easygoing teacher that doesn't care if they're playing with their dog, and you're here and you want their full attention, that's okay, but you have to be very clear about that. So just like you would in a regular classroom, is I expect you to be paying attention, I expect you to have your screen on. If somebody else distracts you, you know, you could turn off your screen and take a break and do that, but be very clear as to what your expectations are for this coming period. And then sometimes at the end too, you can take a few minutes to talk about how it went. You can say, all right, guys, we got 5 more minutes in the class. Let's talk about how things went. I think everybody was able to pay attention, or, hey guys, you had some difficulties paying attention. I want to see this a little better tomorrow. But talk about how it went and you know what you need to see. Let me kick it over to Robin first, and then maybe talking about, you know, what are the transitions or how to manage the frustration and anxiety.
Sure, I want to agree with you as far as the giving them feedback and allowing them some autonomy so they have some input into the process. That's also helpful too, so that they can feel like they're participating in what they're saying, their feedback is meaningful. So they're kind of like, we're all in this together. How did this work today? What do you suggest for different things? And you can use, you know, many things with that, the chat box, whatever, as far as that goes. I think also it's important to maybe have some breaks, you know, to do breathing exercises or, you know, little mindfulness moment, maybe in the beginning of class or the end of class, to kind of know that this is a transition time. This is when we're switching to this, to that, to that. That's also helpful. So those are things I found also. And the routine, it's important to have a routine. They know their expectations, they know what has to be done. And us as the adults sometimes need to manage our expectations, because this is not normal, as we've been saying. And we may have to say, wait a minute, I'm acting classroom-like, and we're not in a classroom. There's distractions, there's things going on. So kind of even self-check.
Okay, Anne, how about you?
I was thinking about something that was said about like pets coming into the, you know, coming into the virtual environment and things like that. But also I know that like during therapy sessions, during stressful situations, pets, nursing homes, pets are very soothing oftentimes for people. And I wonder if there isn't some room for that if the pet isn't being distracting, if it's a child who is utilizing that as a way to kind of stay focused. And I guess that would be evident in the work they're doing. I think rather than are they sitting there petting their dog, or are they just completely not involved? And maybe make that one of the caveats. Maybe that's something that could draw some interest with some of the children. If you're able to, if you have a pet and you want to include them and there's no distraction, I see you're paying attention, then we'll allow that. And maybe in the last 5 minutes of class, we'll leave some room that, people can go around and say, hey, what's your pet's name? I think with changing expectations and trying to work with where we're at, that may be something, instead of, I always think of it as going with the resistance, instead of trying to battle that, maybe incorporate it in a way that could be more positive. And if a teacher has a pet, sharing theirs, bringing everyone together, and this is what our life looks like now, and let's share some of that.
That's kind of neat, Anna. I'm thinking about show and tell for teenagers. We think that they might think that was like babyish, but my experience in groups of teenagers is when you do that sort of regressive fun stuff, they really get a kick out of it.
I was actually thinking of the exact same thing when the topic first came up, show and tell. And
yeah.
To be with pets, but maybe people who don't have pets. What is something important to you that you could show us? And maybe have one person a day. I mean, that could stretch on for quite a while.
Right. I know as in the therapeutic environment, doing it through telehealth, kids love showing you like a poster in their bedroom that someone gave them or something like that. And maybe have that show and tell time to do with kids, because it's not something you often see, and it will encourage cameras on, because I know that's an issue with secondary students, that their teachers are staring at blank screens because no one has their camera on. And maybe, have that be something, show me your favorite this or that or this in the house, and tomorrow we'll do this. So just kind of like roll with it and use what we have being in their homes to our advantage as well.
I'm just remembering working in a place where I had to entertain groups of teenagers, and sometimes we played Duck, Duck, Goose, and they thought that was the best thing ever. And someone commented in the chat that adults like it too. Yeah, who doesn't like to play? Sometimes we get to play.
Yes.
Something that comes to mind is I think there's a lot of teachers thinking, oh, I know, but I'm supposed to be doing, I have a responsibility for imparting this much information on this time frame. And I think that pressure is probably still really on for people. So I would encourage, and I don't know if there's principals that are in this as well, but I would say that this plays a really important role right now, not just keeping students engaged with this fun stuff, but this enhancing the relationship that you have with them. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the students' homes, and sometimes it's not ideal, and how important that relationship with the teacher is. Just someone put in the chat too, sometimes some of the kids are showing off the colors of their hair. If they, a lot of kids have that pandemic hair dye, blue, green, whatever it is. So yeah, I think that could be really fun. And I think when you reach out to someone that's on your chat and say, hey, Mary, you look like you did your hair differently. What's going on? Like, they get a kick out of that. They get a kick out of saying that. So that's pretty cool. And that keeps it personal, and it keeps it relatable, even though you're in that Zoom chat. So I would highly encourage that, and maybe taking some of the pressure off yourselves or off each other in terms of, I must impart this much information in this time period, because this is not a normal time period. It's not a normal algebra class. And that can keep kids engaged, and maybe we lose less because they're more engaged.
Leslie, things like, this will be pajama day, or this will be your favorite t-shirt day, or this would be like things that I know that we use on special days, maybe during Spirit Week or something. You can incorporate those, because the kids miss that kind of stuff, the normalcy of what would happen in their school. And then, wear your jersey day, colors of the school day, things like that. There's no reason those things can't be incorporated in a Zoom session. Will they be 100% participation? Absolutely not. But the kids who do, and it may grow and grow and grow. So I'm all about getting them on the screens, because none of them want to be on the screen. So anything that could get them to, show their face, is great, because I know that's a huge concern.
You know, it's funny that you said pajama day. I'm like, geez, in my house, like every school day is pajama day.
Yeah, but some in the chat, we did have that question about appropriate clothing. Some schools don't allow pajama day, so they have to be dressed for school, specifically what they would wear to school. The dress code applies to Zoom. So, you know, ease that up, and maybe that's something that could be done. Because I think a lot of reasons kids have their cameras off is because they're not able to, you know, or even roll out of bed day. This is what I look for to roll out of bed, you know, so, you know, and
Yeah.
teachers included, do that, participate as well.
You know
We
that
have, go ahead, Em.
one of the things that even teams have been doing, like with families, virtually, we were calling it a virtual dodgeball, where having a moment where you're asking questions, instead of the teacher picking, okay, Robin, your turn, Leslie, your turn, Beth, your turn, having the child who just answered something, okay, throw the ball to someone else. Who gets to answer next?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you have to be here. You have to be paying attention, because it's you might be picked. You might be picked.
Okay.
Another thing that we've also been utilizing, music. That if the expectations are followed and people are staying focused during our time with them, maybe allowing a choice of an appropriate song, like one person gets to pick a song to play for the class to hear, just to hear what they enjoy, to share something about them.
Yeah, I think
Sometimes-
it's interesting because I'm sorry, Charlotte.
No, go ahead, Robin, go ahead.
We kind of transitioned into motivation, like we're talking about motivating things, and in school, it's great when a student comes in my office and says, "Oh, our class was great. We got them off topic." You know, so we talked about something else, and that's important in a virtual environment too, to kind of like, you know, let your students do that. Let your students say something where they're off topic, because you're really on topic most of the time, but it's in a different approach for the kids, and you know, it's interesting to hear that when they come in with that. Oh, he talked about where he was at this time or that. And I'm like, well, that was history. And, you know, so that kind of thing. And I think we're kind of losing that because, you know, you kind of get online and you're like this. And I'm guilty of it as well. And you're forgetting the normal fun that happens in a classroom because your time is condensed with them. You may be shorter. You only see them these days. You have so many things on your plate, and to just take a breath and back to that managing your expectations thing. And give yourself grace. That's my favorite thing to say. Give yourself grace and give your students grace.
I was going to say that also, that's not just for the students, that's for the educators as well.
Yes.
You know, you're there, you're sitting all day long doing the same routine, and there is such burnout from that. Just looking at these same faces, the same frustration, the same anxiety, allowing yourself those moments to say, okay, you know what? Yeah, we have these lessons we need to do, but there are the other lessons that are important too. And managing anxiety, managing mental health, the social awareness, the skills that they're not getting, you know, being in person. How can we apply that in a fun way that also gives us a moment to say, okay, that was nice. That was a nice, you know, 5 minutes that helped me and interested, help my morale. And I think that it feeds off of each other, you know, the students and the teacher or the presenter.
We got some good information coming through via private message in the chat. So guys, if you have something to say, please throw it in the chat, or you can private message me and I'll make sure we get that topic covered. But just to,
Nice.
Someone put in the chat that we have a, hold on a second. They have a pretend we are in homeroom morning where the students just allowed to chat with each other, and then it works well. You could put them in a breakout room and just let them talk. And I think that's fantastic because the social aspect of school is so important to kids, and they're not getting that as much as they used to. We were talking earlier, I was talking about some of my own kids. I said the introvert is doing great with virtual learning. The extrovert who's used to, you know, be in the class clown and running around talking to everybody is really kind of struggling. So I think that's a great idea, and we'd love to hear any more suggestions for getting kids that social kind of interaction.
I think that ties in as well with one of the things that I saw on the list of thoughts was about needy being needy and clinginess throughout the day. And I think that in part, that may be a piece of it, you know, for those kids who are used to getting a little more attention and maybe particularly need it. Maybe they are kids who do not get that at home and really need that social piece with their teachers, students. I think that's so important. I love some of these ideas coming up as far as the breakout rooms, the home room, allowing people to just talk freely. It's about have anything to do with school. I think that could be really beneficial. I think you guys are coming up with great stuff over here. But I think increase that need for, I need people for a lot of, and a lot of teachers.
Right. Because a lot of students, like we may be the only person they're seeing that day, that their parents are at work, they're home with siblings, they're in their rooms. And, you know, I know from a therapeutic standpoint, a lot of times I will just spend time talking with the student about what they're doing, what's going on, what their friends said, because they have no one else. So that 40 minutes that they're talking to me is like, you know, okay, there's another person I could chat with about this stuff. And you're not necessarily, you're not doing some big trauma thing. You're not doing anything huge. You're just being that person that they know is there for them. And teachers are the same way.
That was one of the things we talked about in the last office hours for this age group, was also maybe for teachers to do that as well. Up with a way to, look, this is just a little half hour coffee hour or coffee time, you know, coffee time where people just sit and just talk to each other, you know, socialize, vent. Hey, what's going on with you? People that we don't get to see as often, and we're so busy doing other things. And it's so interesting to me that when this all began, I think a lot of people kind of went, okay, what are we doing? And I don't feel like I'm doing as much. And then suddenly that seemed to change for a lot of people where, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm always on. I'm always on in some way. People can get me all the time. And it's, you know, students, families, other, you know, people we work with. And I think that really, at least with my group in particular, we started feeling that late fall, where it really was like, oh my gosh, I've never worked so much in my life. And because we're trying so hard to do things the same way, as opposed to going, okay, we just can't do that. So how can we be creative and work with what we have, get as much information as we can, and, you know, try and keep all of our sanity in place.
And that's
I want to look at this. There's a message that came through privately that said that the students are not required to have their cameras on. So, so something like pajama day or those kind of fun things, that the kids aren't going to participate in that. And I have some interesting thoughts about that. I don't know if that person is saying that no students, there's just not a school-wide requirement to have the camera on. And as a teacher, are you able to break from that and say, in this class, you will have your camera on? I know that where we work, we finally got to the point where meeting leaders were feeling like nobody was even there, that it was crickets talking to people. So it became a company-wide expectation that people have their cameras on, minus any emergency or, having to refill your coffee or whatever. But for the most part, you need to have your cameras on. So I don't know if that's a school-wide rule and if that's something it might be worth talking about it. But it's definitely, it would be interesting to see if it was something that you could, this person responded that no, they're actually not allowed to ask them to put their camera on, which is interesting. Robin, you're nodding. Have you heard that before?
Yes, absolutely. It's kind of the student's choice. And I know a lot of teachers are looking at blank boards, just like names and no picture or anything. So, perhaps those ideas that we were talking about, maybe for the first 5 minutes, you can put your camera on, we'll do t-shirt day, who knows, they may participate and then go back to where you are, Yeah, but it's everywhere. That I believe that's an issue with different places.
Okay, so basically schools are saying we're not allowed to ask kids to put their cameras on. And I can understand some of the reasoning behind that. Some of the kids are in places that they don't feel comfortable sharing. So that's a pretty frustrating thing, I would think, for teachers who can't really offer that. So you're doing all this teaching or all these activities and you don't know, if you're reaching anybody.
And a lot of the feedback I've gotten from students is that some of them are embarrassed where they live. They
Yeah.
feel like they don't
Yeah.
want anyone to see it. You're students
Yeah.
with a nicer bedroom and this, that, and the other thing. So, or they may be in the bedroom with 2 siblings, or they may, you know, so there's so many variables that go into it as to what, it's not simply they're being, you know, rude. There are reasons why they're not turning that camera on. And we have to kind of think about that as well.
Yeah, that's a very good
Even
point.
in a session with a student, I would say, or do you have your camera off on purpose? And yes, no, maybe. I said, okay, well, if you feel comfortable at another time during the session, put it on. So that, you know, and it could be something. Their house was dirty, no one cleaned, there's dishes in the sink. I have to be in the kitchen. And we have to be mindful of where these students are in these homes. Not everyone is living in a 5-bedroom home where everyone has their own bedroom. They may be in a corner in the kitchen at this time. So that's another thing, you know, it's not always just their attitude. It could be other variables that are going on in the home that they are.
This person responded as well. They someone did a survey that said 14% said that it was because they didn't have their camera on because they did, mostly because they didn't want to look at themselves, which is
Right.
really
Mhm.
interesting because boy, has that been a new thing to this pandemic,
Yes.
is getting to watch yourself talk 24/7. I don't love it myself.
No.
I know some people who have they put a piece of paper, an index card over their self view.
Mhm.
Just, or, you know, just prop something up to cover their self view so they don't have to watch themselves talk. That's new and different.
I was thinking that before when saying about, you know, kids not wanting to be on or participate. I was thinking about you and I, Leslie, this morning earlier. We've talked about this. We talk with each other about this. There are plenty of days I don't want to be on camera, where it's like, oh gosh, it's a bad hair day, or I'm not feeling well, or I'm not feeling it. I have some people, kids, oh, they're kind of giving me a problem staying in my home. But I know, particularly with the families we work with and family-based, they'll meet online, but we do have families that we struggle with at times because even though we normally would be going into the home, being that we're not initially doing that right now, there are families that are like, we don't want them seeing our house, or it's dirty, it's messy. You have a drunk parent there.
That's a great segue, Anne, because that's some of the stuff that comes up in the Jamboard, also in the registration information and on chats for previous sessions, is that what are teachers supposed to do when they can see that there's, you know, abuse or neglect going on, or, you know, maybe something that doesn't quite rise to that level. So let's talk about that for a minute. Something that came up in the registration information is concerns with abuse or neglect in the home. And I definitely want to touch on that because we are still all mandated reporters. So let's talk a little bit about what that means, because that doesn't always come up for teachers as often as it comes up for us in the mental health professions. We make quite a lot of child abuse referrals, and it's important to remember that, yes, you do have to report it, and you have to, you know, follow your school's protocols, but the law says that if you suspect abuse, you have to report it, and people can't tell you not to. That's really important, and we'll talk a little bit about what to look for as well. But what's really important, and a mistake that so many people make when it comes to mandated reporting, is you don't have to investigate it. You don't have to be sure. That's what they do. That's why we make these reports. So what we do is, if we suspect abuse or neglect in the home, we report it. You can either make the phone call or you can report it online with the barest minimal of information, just enough to, you know, make them be able to make contact with that family, and they investigate it and they do all those things. So I've seen a lot of people, particularly in schools, make the mistake of thinking, I have to sit down with this kid, I have to interview them about what's going on, and you don't, and in fact, you should not.
I was just going to say, Leslie, and it's better if you don't.
Yeah.
If you don't investigate it. If you suspect it, just because then there's no chance of, you know, anyone saying you led the child into saying a certain thing, or you twisted words, or you just, if you think it, report it.
Yeah.
First thing that's going to happen is it will be followed up on, and it's unfounded. But you wouldn't want to leave a case where you go, okay, I'm not sure, and then find out something's happening later, or something does happen. So one of those things, when I was thinking even signs, like if it's kids who do normally have their cameras on, and then suddenly are not. something different, different things that like you would notice in the classroom. Oh, this child is normally very chatty. And I'm noticing this week, something's very different. They're not interacting, they're not paying attention, they're not turning things in. Things that we would look for. Marks, I mean, if their camera is on, do you see something? Or do you see something in the background that looks, you know, not quite right, or something that's being said or done? Food, I saw that on here, not enough food. That's something, you know, food insecurity is a huge issue right now, but that's also something that's quite reportable.
And let's get back to that because we talked about that yesterday and there's resources out there. And I also want to kick it to Robin as far as reporting stuff in the school. But it's also really important to remember a lot of people don't report stuff because they're afraid that the kid's going to be yanked out of the house and put in foster care. And that's really not how that works.
No.
The resources aren't even available to do that if they wanted to. What they do is they go in and they investigate, and it might be an abuse or neglect allegation if it was something that was deliberate or very negligent. But more often than not, it ends up being what we call a general protective services referral. And that's this family is struggling and they need help. And many, if not most families in those situations, they really are. Maybe the parent lost their job and there's no food, but there are resources available for those families that those would be the channels where they can access those resources. So even if you're not sure, but don't be afraid to report those things. Before we go back to food insecurity though, Robin, let me just throw it to you and see, you know, any protocols or concerns about teachers reporting that you've seen or dealt with?
No, but just, you know, you have that gut in the classroom, that gut feeling, and you know things. Go keep that online. There's no different. I had a situation this week where a case manager called me because the kid was ill and the parents didn't know about it. And I said, call the mom now, just like you would do, you know, call the mom, let her know she's not feeling well. She's at work, you know. Oh, you know, so you just have to be reminded of how you dealt with things responsibly in the building, and it goes online as well. You know, but as far as, you know, abuse and neglect, same things you're noticing. Kids may tell you something also, but as we said, you're not the counselor, you're not the therapist. And most of the time people are getting resources that they need. And there's people now who never needed resources before, who are in situations where they now need them. And that's a very delicate situation. Like we know there's many families we've worked with who children and youth know them by name. And but there's many families coming up that have never dealt with any food insecurity or abuse or alcoholism and all that, because there's so much pressure and so many people now losing jobs, not being able to pay rent, losing homes because of mortgage. So it's definitely escalating in how people are reacting. And it may not be that student who you always thought was the student, you know, it could be a different, you know, a different student, because socioeconomic things are shifting. So it makes a big difference.
That's a good point. And I think a lot about parental mental illness as well.
Yes.
I mean, every mental illness right now is exacerbated by the pandemic and the other, you know, stressors that are going out there in the world. So, you know, those things which are impacting all of us, if we have mental health symptoms, they can be worse. So they used an example yesterday of a little girl who was trying to do school, but mom was just asleep all the time and mom was not providing any supervision. And they didn't know why. Maybe mom was depressed, or maybe mom was working 3 jobs and that's the only time she gets sleep. But that, if you make a report, they will find that out and they will help that family. We're going to talk a little bit about food insecurity because it's happening right now. And Robin, you made a really good point that this might be a family that's always had enough and they've never had to access systems. And these are the families that don't know how and maybe feel a little bit ashamed of reaching out for help. So, and Robin, I'll ask you this again too, but I know a lot of schools are making provisions for the kids that need to get their food through school. I know.
Yes, and it's all students. A lot of the, you know, the districts, I don't know if it's statewide or not, I'm not sure, but it's for all students. Free lunch and breakfast for all students. It must be a state policy. So it doesn't matter who you are, you're getting free breakfast and lunch. So it's kind of almost, it was funny because the student that I worked with who always wanted breakfast, but didn't qualify for free lunch, it was like, this is the greatest thing now, I'm getting these bagel that I wanted every day. So it's funny to see it doesn't have a negative connotation with kids in school, you know, getting lunch and stuff. So yeah, that's kind of a different thing that's happening. But as far as food insecurity, yes. And there are also, a lot of schools are giving meals out during the, you know, when we're off, or at different schools to help over the weekends. There's so many things available, backpack buddies, all kind of things that are available, and people just don't know right now.
Right. And they don't know those things. My kids were so excited they could sleep in and not have to eat breakfast.
Right.
They're getting access to it at school.
Right. Right. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting. There's so many food resources available, things like food banks. But again, if you're a middle-class family that all of a sudden is destitute, you're not going to know as much about food banks as someone else. So the United Way actually put a link into the chat that's extremely important, and I think everybody should check out this link because the United Way is great about keeping resources together and being an access point for resources. So you know, make sure that people in your school know that that's a place to go if they have a family that's struggling for food or struggling in other ways. The same thing goes for mental health resources. So the school counselor and people like Robin in the schools are great at helping people navigate those systems. But if you've never had to get your child mental health services before, and all of a sudden your child's depressed and they're refusing to get up to school, those resources are all out there and they're all available and have openings. So I would say for if you see a student in your classroom who is really struggling and you think that there might be some mental health issues, pick it back to Robin again, sorry, picking on the school people, what would be the best direction for teachers to go if they think this child is depressed?
Right. I often, talk with guidance counselors as well. And the students usually put into the student assistance program where it can be figured out what would be the best resources for them as far as therapy or outpatient therapy, and kind of get an idea. We have a lot of resources here at my school, so we can kind of fit kids where they belong as far as so that their needs are met. So we're very fortunate in that respect. But mostly, United Way is a perfect example of a place to just go on your own and give that information out as far as like your guidance department or whatever.
At the end of our session, we're going to give you an email address too that you can use to contact us at Pinebrook, and we are committed to continuing to help you with these things. So if you have a question about a family that needs resources, feel free to use that email address as well. I want to talk just briefly in this kind of section about attendance, because attendance is such a barometer of some of the other things that kids are dealing with, whether that's mental health issues or situations with not having enough food or not having the ability to do laundry. But a lot of things can keep kids from from showing up for school. Someone put into the Jamboard, some kids have chores at home that they're expected to do, or they're taking care of their siblings. And we keep hearing this a lot in secondary ed, is that mom has to work and they need to keep an eye, and they're trying to do their own school and making sure their siblings are doing school. And there's not a whole lot of ways around that other than, as Robin would say, allowing some grace for that. Families are really, really struggling right now. When it comes to just attendance though, that's something else that it could be a reportable incident in terms of child abuse, but also there are a lot of programs and agencies out there that help with attendance that are still working. So a lot of the resources out there for kids who are truant or have attendance issues are still available, even though it might be a virtual learning kind of situation. What we find, and we do some truancy work as well, what we find is that when we go into the home and we work with the family on this truancy issue, there are so many different reasons that contribute to that. It's not just a kid being lazy or a parent being neglectful. Things like kids not having laundry, clean laundry. So many different things that can be addressed by providing resources or supporting these families. So with attendance, I'm actually not 100% sure, and I'm going to pick on Robin again, is when you have an attendance issue, is that something that goes through the student assistance process, or how does that become known?
Yes, that also does as well. Or it's because it is so prevalent right now. It is skyrocketed, the numbers with attendance issues, because a lot of times they may just sign on for one block or sign on at the end of the day, or and trying to figure out how that fits into it. But yes, that would be a SAP process as well. Or some districts have an attendance person, some districts have, so it's different in all districts. But it's very difficult now. Just think of your own motivational level as far as getting on a computer or doing that. It's very easy to roll over and say, I'm not going to do it today. So once again, we kind of have to think this is the new normal. And how can we get over that? How can it be? I mean, obviously there's, state mandated days students have to attend and things like that, but it's very, very difficult. And if we're honest with ourselves, we feel that way too, but as the adults, we can't do that. If you have a student at home with no parental supervision, no one is around, it's very difficult to get them to think it's a chronic problem right now. It truly is.
Right. I've also heard that there's some glitches too in attendance tracking as well.
Yes.
So I've heard people say, my kid's being marked absent and they're there, I'm
Right.
watching them be there. So
Right. I've heard that as well.
yeah, that would be something to, talk to the school about if it's a parent. Clearly, if you're the teacher, if that kid is signing on or not for the most part, depending on the camera situation. In the last few minutes that we have, and again, feel free to please throw things in the chat or private message. But let's finish up by talking a little bit about things like staff burnout. I know that someone yesterday mentioned that they have a lot of coworkers that are sick with COVID and stuff is piling on them because I think this was in actually the early childhood stuff, but coworkers are sick and now I'm taking on extra shifts or what have you just to deal with that and the burnout and our own feelings about everything that's going on and self-care. And I'll throw this one to you, Anne, in terms of talking about self-care for people and these teachers that are, working so hard to adjust to this new normal. What are your thoughts on making it easier or self-care? How do we get through this?
In talking with teachers, when I was in school doing trauma trainings or just, during this with my own program and speaking with my team, where I'm seeing it as well, I oftentimes will hear people say, I don't have time for self-care. I don't have time. I'm so busy. And much of that hasn't changed. You're online all day doing schoolwork. You get off from there and you still have whatever it is you do in your personal life in the evening. So time is limited. However, I think that when we're talking about all of these things with kids and how do we help them to be more in tune, engaged, participating, have motivated, we also have to look at, can we find a half an hour in a day that's about us? We're definitely limited in the kinds of things that maybe we used to do at one time, prior to COVID, that might have been releases for us or ways for us to unwind or have some self-care time. However, I think if you, start looking, making lists, what are some things that, are really pleasing to me that make me feel less anxious, less agitated, less frustrated and less like I don't want to get up in the morning and turn on that Zoom and have to do class with these people who aren't paying attention to me. What is it for you that might help? And I think that so often in fields where we are caring for other people in one way or another, we are the worst at taking care of ourselves. And this past year, I have seen burnout in my team members and other people I know at rates that are just astronomical, with people feeling like I give up. I just don't want to do this anymore. So I think it's just so important, really focusing. If you're not taking care of you, you can't take care of other people. I think there's the saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. Okay, so whether it's 10 minutes, whether it's a half hour, whether it's an hour, finding something each day that this is for me and this is something I'm doing, and it doesn't matter what else is happening, I'm taking care of me for that time.
That's interesting too, when we talk about self-care, what do we mean by that? So I think we have preconceived notions about what that is. Like, I know that I'm like, oh, wow, I have that half an hour that Anne told me about. I should go work out. No, I'm going to take a nap.
I was just going to say, that self-care can be so many things.
Yes.
For me, my self-care is at the beginning of the day. I sit with my coffee, and I'm not someone who wakes up grumpy, but that's my morning time. I want a half hour to have my coffee, look at the weather, and just kind of sit and drink it and relax. Like, if I don't have that, my whole day is going to be off. And it may not seem like a big self-care ritual, but it's enough that it's about me and it's my time, and it helps me to get my head right.
Mhm.
Like I used to have where I would drive to work. I had an hour drive each way. So on the way to work, I could be driving there, listening to music, getting my head in the right place for my day. And on the way home, I could be decompressing, going, okay, now I can leave this behind and get in a different mode. We don't have that anymore. We don't have that anymore. So some people reading 10 minutes, I'm going to look at that book. I'm going to do a crossword. I'm going to do a little exercise. It can be painting my nails.
I was
Whatever.
saying that mine is Grubhub, because
No.
man, if I'm done in the day and I know it's expensive and I should be putting that money towards that bill or in savings, but I'm like, you know what? I cannot deal with cooking dinner right now. So sometimes we order a pizza or whatever it is. But I think the big thing about defining self-care right now is what is going to make it easier for me to get through this day.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be go to the gym. You don't want to go to the gym, don't go to the gym. Like
Yeah.
it's about doing what feels right for you and gets you through. Robin, what are your thoughts?
I agree. I couldn't agree more. I like to use the analogy with my students as like when you're in an airplane and they say, put the oxygen mask on yourself before you help your child. Same thing. You need to be well yourself. And it's not simple. I think people hear self-care, they're thinking they're going to meditate in a corner or do yoga, or no, grab yourself the flowers at the checkout at the grocery store to put on your desk. Have that cup of coffee, call a friend up and you can just talk on the phone. You don't have to do a Zoom meeting and have the coffee with them, or a cocktail hour. I do that with my friends. So it's like, something that's different. It doesn't necessarily have to be these things we think of as self-care, being in a bubble bath, really, no, it's not going to happen. You have kids running around the house. But if you can, put your headphones on and sit in the bathroom, because that's the only place you have, listen to music for 10 minutes, that's self-care. You're putting yourself before everything else. And it's truly that simple. You're taking the time for yourself and allowing yourself to have something that you like, a cup of coffee, flowers, whatever it is. It's not, I think we try to make it so big, like going to the gym or something like that. And then it's like, well, then I'm doing nothing, because just those little moments you could steal.
And maybe nothing is what you need.
Yeah,
Right.
I know that now I take my coffee, instead of having it in the house, like I would have it around my porch before I drive off to work, my car, and I put my music on and I drink my coffee, and people are like, you're sitting in your car drinking. Yes, yes, I am. And that's
Guys, we have to wind up shortly, but I wanted to sort of circle back to where we started a little bit, which is the whole notion of self-care is giving yourself a break when you are maybe behind in that algebra lesson, or you didn't do everything you wanted to do, or you're not doing it as perfectly as you used to. We started out talking about anxiety, and Robin, you used the phrase like give yourself some grace. That's part of self-care too. Is this is not a normal situation. And it's not the same, and you don't have to do everything the same as you always did, and you don't have to have the same standards. Sometimes you're like, you know what, I did X, Y, and Z, and that's going to have to be good enough. So I'm going to encourage everybody else.
Absolutely.
I'm encouraging everybody else to really look at your thinking around, what standards are you holding yourself to. It's 4:00, and if anybody wants to put anything in the chat, we're still, happy to talk about that. I'm going to kick it back to the United Way. To talk a little bit about where to go from here.
Thank you. So thank you everyone for spending your time with us. I'm sure it's been a long day today and a long week, and I hope you all have a good Friday and a happy weekend where we can all for sure focus on some self-care and maybe come up with a self-care plan for ourselves, like little things we can commit to doing. I do like I like the coaching that little things count too. It doesn't have to be this big, go to the gym 7 days a week. It can be, 10 minutes and a cup of coffee and some music in your car. So thanks for that framing and encouragement to just do some little things for ourselves every day to really help with our own emotional wellness. Because this is a stressful time for all of us, kids and adults alike. So thank you, Robin, Ann, and Leslie, for sharing your wisdom, your expertise, lots of practical tips. Really appreciate it. Also want to let everybody know Pinebrook has been gracious enough to provide some follow-up support. So if there are any questions or concerns, if there's like, I've got this one kid I'm really worried about and feel comfortable talking about it in the session, anything like that, You can email office hours at pbfalv.org, PinebrookFamilyAnswersLV.org, and someone from the Pinebrook team will follow up with you with some additional coaching and guidance. So just want to let you know, Pinebrook has generously offered that resource as well in between these sessions. So we thank you for joining today. We hope you'll join us for our next session in February. Invitations for that will be coming out shortly. And also recordings of these sessions will be available on the Greater Lehigh Valley website, usually maybe 2 weeks after the sessions, they should be up there. So thank you for your time today and wish you all a happier 2021 and hope to see you all again in February.